This podcast is produced by St. Paul Public Schools Literacy and Personalized Learning Department at the Office of Teaching and Learning. Welcome to On the Spot Literacy, connecting teachers together to share ideas. I'm Sue Braithwaite. Do you have a question? This is Sue. Today's question comes from Chris.
Sue, I'm wondering why students need to read independently.
Great question, Chris. Our first reason students need to be reading independently is we want to think about our culturally responsive teaching practices, the rigor, the relationships, the relevance, and the realness. And when we think about closing the achievement gap, the best way students can learn to read is to actually read and do the work. And so when we think about how independently reading communicates high expectations, we expect our kids to read, we want them to read, and we know that they can read. And when we think about their engagement in reading, in independent reading, it's really important to think about that student voice and choice. No longer should be teachers assigning books for children. They should have a choice in what they want to be reading about. So the idea of really encouraging our students to choose the books that they want to read rather than us telling them what to read. It also, I think, it gives them an opportunity to problem solve. The idea that finding books that they want to read about. So I like this book, maybe I'll like that book. I don't like this kind of book, so maybe I'm not going to read that kind of book. And then I think it's also a way for us as educators to really gauge our effectiveness in our instruction. If students aren't making progress, how much are they reading? What are they reading about? So when we look at their reading logs, their goal setting around reading, what are they actually doing during that independent reading time? And I think a big piece that is very interesting to me is that students who participate in independent reading in school are more likely to read outside of school. And I think that it's really important that we give them an opportunity in class to be able to read and help encourage them find what is their just right book and what are the things that they want to read about. Independent reading right now, when we think about it, it fits into that gradual release of responsibility in terms of our Reader's Workshop model. So when we think about independent reading, we think about how it is the last piece of our independent reading or our Reader's Workshop block. So we think about mini lessons as very structured. It's we do for them, I'm going to teach you. Then we think about small group instruction as the gradual release, and then the independent reading is like the culmination. I like to use the example of it's like the dance recital. So students or the cooking class or the football game, whatever analogy you want to use, but it's that teachers teach. They practice in small groups, and now when they're independently reading, now they're on their own. The coach is on the sidelines watching to see the effectiveness of their teaching and did it transfer to the students. So when we think about that's kind of our why. So why do we do independently reading? Is we know that we have to do something to get better at something and enjoy something. I think we have to bring back the love of reading, and if we don't offer students an opportunity to find our enthusiasm over reading, they're not going to find theirs. And so what is independent reading? Independent reading really is a carefully designed, accountable moment for students to read a book without support. And what I mean by carefully designed, it's long gone are the days where we just say, go get your book box, go get your book bin. It's really the idea that we want our kids to be accountable for their learning, to make learning more authentic for them, but also that we are reading for a purpose. And so that idea of it's accountable, there should be expectations when students are reading independently. So I want to share sort of the reading then and now. Do you remember the days of Dear, Drop Everything and Read, or Sustained Silent Reading? And those were, if we're really going to educate our 21st century learners or our 21st century readers, that served a purpose. Everybody did it. We all stopped to read. But my question back for you is, what do you remember about Drop Everything and Read? Chris, did you do Drop Everything and Read when you were in school?
I did, Sue. I remember that when we did Dear Time, I would see students who didn't have books, and so they'd be constantly like getting a book from my bookshelf, so it'd be a different book every time. So there wasn't that level of engagement where they really cared about the book. It was 20 minutes of, I'll read this for Miss Turnbull, but it's maybe not a book that I really want to read. And then the next time they would come back, they'd grab a different book off the bookshelf for that 20 minutes. So it wasn't a way that I saw where kids had a book that they really loved or that they were really engaged with.
Great. So then when we think about the conventional independent reading, we did push the just right books, student choose from a book bin that's leveled. We might have done some conferring. We might have done some write about reading or reading logs, but not really understanding the purpose of why we need to do that. And now when we think about our next generation independent reading, and that's the kind of the new buzzword is next generation readers, the 21st century learner, is that we're expanding that just right book to be beyond that it's just one that they can access. It's also, do they like it? Do they want to read it? It's also understanding that different types of texts serve different purposes. Are we letting kids choose? Are they reading a cookbook? Are they reading a magazine? Are they reading a blog? Multiple ways that we can access materials. It's also really emphasizing reading for reading's sake. So that for reading is that, yes, there's a accountability factor, but we're also reading to learn something or to know something or to enjoy something. I think the new terminology and kind of my favorite thinking is it insists on intellectual accountability. And that idea of when you're reading, you're doing something. And as adults, that's obvious. We know every time we read, we're reading for whatever purpose we're reading for. But to our early readers and our students who might struggle with reading, they don't know why they're reading. They can't project when they're 20, when they're 25, when they're 30, when they're 50. And so that idea of insist on an intellectual accountability really lends itself to comprehension. Are they reading and understanding what they're reading and also questioning what they're reading? Why am I reading this? What is the author trying to tell me? How is this serving my purpose? It also is an opportunity that when kids are reading that they're goal setting and they're thinking about how are they going to become better readers? How much are they going to be reading? As well as then during this time, teachers are conferring, doing small groups, but also giving that opportunity for teaching either strategy lessons or small group instruction. And so it's real important that for our next generation readers, that we really think about intellectual accountability, goal setting, and conferring. So now, how do we get started in independent reading? So we've talked about the why and the what, and now we're going to talk about the how. How do we get started? And so there's a couple of resources. So first of all, you have to think about what are your rituals and routines in your classroom. Have you set up a classroom where students are feeling excited and enthusiastic about reading? Do you have your library organized in the early grades K1 by levels and genres and 2 through 5, 8? Do you have book bins that might be leveled text inside, but around themes and genres and things that our students are interested in? So thinking about the space. Do you also have a place for students to feel comfortable reading? Do you have places around the room? What makes your environment enjoyable for reading? And it doesn't mean having kids laying under the tables with their feet up. It should be to insist on intellectual accountability. We need to make sure that they are engaged in reading, as well as then what are the strategies you're teaching them to be able to engage in their text. Many kids are reading, but they're not sure what to do with their text or how do they show us what we know. So if you have the Reading Strategies book by Jennifer Saravello, we've outlined a few types of reading strategies that you might want to teach to your class, to a small group, to a student while you're conferring, so that students feel like they're engaged in the process of reading. So in order to meet our next generation 21st century readers, we have kind of some guidelines based off of the Teachers College research for the 21st century reader about volume, stamina, partner work, and ways to jot or notice their writing. The writing that students do during independent reading should not be for the teacher, but actually for themselves. How are they capturing their thinking and asking questions as they read and go through their text? So when we think about our KN1 students, Having a reading mat so that they're taking their 10 to 14 books, putting them on one side of their mat, and as they read them, they put them on the other side of their mat. It's really important in order for us to meet the needs of our readers and close the achievement gap that the volume of reading increases for all students. For every student. Students, when we think about it, if you really broke down our days, how much are we actually asking our kids to read? And if we know that kids need to read more, then we need to make sure that students have access to texts as well as the time to be able to read those. And then the opportunity to talk about text. I kind of joke that everyone who goes to book clubs goes to listen and talk about the text that they're doing. And so it's really important that our kids get an opportunity to share what they know, share their enthusiasm, share what they're talking about with someone else. So we're really giving an opportunity to have some time to either have a book club, a partner work with their students. I also think that when we think about what does independent reading look like back in your building, so a couple of suggestions, you'll notice that students read self-selected text. This increases engagement. Students and teachers are observing students reading and asking questions, so being able to confer with them. Students might be making notes on their Post-it notes or in a notebook or a graphic organizer about their reading and what they're thinking as they're going. Our other big push is that students need to be reading volumes as well as then the time on text. If we're having kids read 5 minutes a day independently, we're not doing them any help. They're not going to increase their reading ability if we don't actually have them reading. So thinking about how can we encourage our students to be reading volume and stamina, as well as then as the adults giving them time to read. And then I think if we're thinking about look-fors in our classroom, my question back to you would be, what does your Reader's Workshop block look like? Do you have your short 15-minute mini lesson? Is there time for students when they're not meeting in small groups or you're conferring or in strategy lessons? Are they reading? And then I'll ask, what are they reading? Are they getting an opportunity for voice and choice? Chris, I have a question for you. So when we think about our students capturing their thinking as they're reading or wanting to be able to share their reading, are there ways in technology that students could be able to share that with themselves or with their classmates or with their teachers?
That's a great question, Sue. I can think of a couple ways off the top of my head. One, if students are using Seesaw, they could create a video of themselves, maybe summarizing what they read today in a minute video, or they could pose a question. If they were reading, they could make a prediction about what they think might happen next, and then they could submit that through Seesaw, where then they could watch the video, their classmates could see the video, and their teacher could see the video, and then parents at home as well could see that video, and they could follow up later with the student about what they're reading at school based on that video that they saw. They could also draw a picture and submit that through Seesaw. And if they're using Schoology, then students, the teacher might set up a discussion forum, and students could post in that discussion forum, again, a basic summary of what they read today, or a prediction, or even a question about characters, or what characters are doing, or what they think might happen next in the novel. So there's quite a few ways that students could record their thinking and then share that with classmates or with the teacher. They could also use either notes or pages on the iPad, and they could just record things for themselves. Again, maybe keep a summary, what page they left off on, what's happening in the book, or what they think is going to happen next, or questions that they have that they maybe want to follow up with the teacher on.
Great ideas, Chris. Do you have ideas for engagement using our iPads with students in reading? Please share them with us. Susan.braithwaite@spps.org. Thanks for joining us for On the Spot Literacy. See you next time.